peoples. I mean, even when I was in makeup just now, somebody came up almost crying, saying how much that she meant to them. And every day people tell me what an inspiration she was, how much they miss her, what they did the day she died.
What if everything you thought you knew about the British royal family was built on a lie? For 30 years, we've been told a story about rivalry, jealousy, and two women who couldn't stand to be in the same room together. The media sold us this image of Princess Diana, the glamorous, emotional icon, constantly at odds with Princess Anne, the no-nonsense royal who supposedly rolled her eyes at the drama. But what if that entire narrative was completely false? 3 weeks before Princess Diana died in Paris, she sat down at her desk in Kensington Palace and wrote a letter that nobody knew existed. Until now. And the man who just revealed it didn't hold a press conference or release a statement. No, he put on white archival gloves, unlocked an antique mahogany box with an ornate iron key, and pulled out a document that's about to rewrite 3 decades of royal history. This isn't just a secret. This is a bombshell. And the way it came out? Pure theater. Charles Spencer didn't just announce this discovery casually. He orchestrated it like a scene from a historical drama. Picture this. Morning sunlight streaming through the library windows of Althorp House, his ancestral estate, a vault hidden beneath the mansion, an old mahogany box that had been locked away for decades, and inside that box, a single sheet of light blue paper with Diana's handwriting on it. But before he said a word to the press, Charles did something crucial. He spent 48 hours working with a forensic document examiner from the London Probate Archives. They didn't just glance at the letter and call it authentic. They analyzed every detail. The handwriting pressure points, the paper quality, the ink composition. They compared it against hundreds of verified letters in the Spencer family archive. They examined the signature under magnification. They checked the embossed Kensington Palace crest at the top, and the date in the corner, August 10th, 1997, exactly 21 days before Diana's death in Paris. This wasn't some random note scribbled in haste. This was a deliberate, calculated piece of documentation written by a woman who knew exactly what she was doing. And here's where it gets even more interesting. There's a second copy of this letter sitting in a law firm vault in Fleet Street, sealed in a lead-lined container that was registered under an anonymous corporate holding company 30 years ago. The palace legal team tried desperately to find grounds to block the publication. They searched for loopholes, consulted constitutional experts, reviewed centuries-old statutes, but they couldn't stop it. Why? Because the letter was addressed to a private individual, Princess Anne, not a state official. It was found in the private archives of Althorp House, not the royal archives at Windsor Castle. The Crown has zero constitutional authority over it, which means that if the palace knew this letter existed, or even suspected it might, then everything they've told us for 3 decades has been a carefully constructed lie. So, what's actually in this letter? Because the details are way more specific than you'd expect. Diana wasn't just venting about feeling isolated or misunderstood. She wasn't writing a generic emotional complaint about palace life. She had gotten her hands on an internal palace document 2 days before writing this letter. And that document outlined a plan to reduce her security detail as a way to pressure her into giving up her independent media work. Diana called it an administrative trap. Those are her exact words, not Charles Spencer's interpretation, not some biographer's analysis, Diana's own phrase. And it gets darker. She wrote that the ultimate goal was to use an ancient clause in the 1772 Royal Marriages Act to launch a custody dispute over William and Harry. The palace was preparing to argue that the sovereign had the right to control where the princes lived, where they went to school, and basically every aspect of their daily lives. This wasn't paranoia. This was a woman who saw the legal machinery being assembled against her and decided to document it before it was too late. And here's the part that makes this letter so powerful. Diana specifically asked Anne to be an emotional barrier between her sons and the traditionalists who wanted to mold them into distant symbols of the state. She wrote that Anne was the only member of the Windsor family with the courage to look a reigning monarch in the eye and defend a mother's basic human rights. Think about that for a second. Diana didn't trust the Queen. She didn't trust Charles. She didn't trust the advisors or the courtiers. She trusted Anne, the woman the media told us she hated. Now here's what nobody's talking about yet. Anne actually did what Diana asked. For 30 years. She executed the mission in complete silence, never seeking credit, never giving interviews, never once hinting at what she was doing. The evidence is hidden in plain sight if you know where to look. The court circular, the official daily record of royal activities, shows that between 1997 and 2005, Anne quietly adjusted her charity schedules so she'd be at Windsor during the boys' school breaks. No cameras, no press announcements, no royal correspondence documenting her visits. She'd just show up in her private car, walk with William and Harry through the park, and give them space away from the public relations machinery grinding away at Clarence House. That's not coincidence. That's a promise being kept. But it goes even deeper. Between 1996 and 1997, Anne's charitable schedules placed her in the same regional areas as Diana's private humanitarian visits on multiple occasions. Their cars were logged at identical service depots near the M4 motorway within 30 minutes of each other on 3 separate dates. Those weren't traffic coincidences. Those were private briefings. Anne was giving Diana tactical updates on the legal strategies being developed by the king's solicitors, and there's documented proof of Anne actively protecting Diana inside the palace walls. In the summer of 1996, during a private family dinner at Balmoral Castle, a senior advisor to the Queen suggested using ancient crown property statutes to restrict Diana's access to her apartments at Kensington Palace. The idea was to force Diana to move her office outside London, which would have reduced her ability to capture media attention and work independently. Princess Anne interrupted the presentation mid-sentence and shut it down completely. She reportedly called it an act of absolute corporate stupidity that would permanently damage the Crown's public standing. The eviction proposal was killed before it could even be drafted into an official warrant. Diana found out about the confrontation the next morning through a secure telephone line provided by Anne's lady-in-waiting. So these two women weren't just polite to each other, they were actively coordinating against the palace machinery. The fact that Anne kept this secret for 3 decades is honestly the most revealing part of the entire story. Think about how many people have profited off Diana's memory over the years. Former staff members wrote tell-all books. Friends sold stories to tabloids. Secret recordings were leaked to international broadcasters for millions of pounds. But Anne, she gave 0 interviews. She authorized 0 press statements. She kept her copy of the letter locked in a fireproof military-grade combination safe at Gatcombe Park, hidden beneath equestrian breeding logs and family land titles. When the palace archivist requested a comprehensive audit of her private correspondence files ahead of the King's Jubilee events, she rejected the request instantly. She told them her safe contained personal family correspondence entirely separate from the state's administrative workflow, and she refused to hand over the keys. The palace legal department realized they had no grounds to force a daughter of Queen Elizabeth to surrender her private papers without creating a damaging internal court battle, so the letter stayed locked away. Until Charles Spencer traveled to Gloucestershire by private car to brief Anne on what he'd found at Althorpe. He told her his legal team had verified the original manuscript and that he believed the public interest required publication to correct the false historical narrative. Anne listened in complete silence, leaning against her roll-top desk, and then she gave her quiet endorsement. She understood that with the Althorpe copy fully authenticated, any attempt to hide the duplicate would look like a desperate palace cover-up. The safe was opened later that afternoon, so her solicitors could cross-reference the text one final time. The duplicate copy matched exactly. Same handwriting pressure points, same faded black ink, same Kensington Palace paper. But here's where this story takes another shocking turn. The letter references a secret personal archive containing over 200 original letters and diary entries from Diana's school days through her early marriage. Diana wrote that she had hidden this archive entirely outside the palace infrastructure, completely separate from the royal archives at Windsor Castle. And here's the part that's probably keeping palace lawyers awake at night. She instructed her personal trustees to release the entire archive to the public if the central administration ever attempted to completely block her access to her sons following the upcoming autumn term. That means there might be 200 more documents sitting in an anonymous vault somewhere, and their release is tied to a condition Diana set in writing decades ago. The king's advisors are reportedly working overtime trying to track the movement of old Spencer family holdings from that era, desperately attempting to locate this archive before any further disclosures happen. Can you imagine what those documents might contain? Letters to friends, diary entries about palace meetings, personal reflections on her marriage, her struggles, her fears. This could be the most comprehensive first-hand account of life inside the modern royal family ever compiled, written by the one person who had nothing to lose by telling the truth. When this story broke, the palace communications department went into complete meltdown. Over 300 administrative computers within the palace network simultaneously accessed the high-resolution scans uploaded from the Althorpe Estate press server. Senior media directors abandoned their morning tea to crowd around the monitoring wall, watching BBC News and Sky News broadcast continuous live coverage. The front pages of every major newspaper featured large black typography analyzing the phrase "administrative trap" that Diana had written 33 years earlier. And the king's advisors? They started calculating the strategic damage immediately. Public opinion polls showed over 80% of citizens praising Anne for carrying the emotional burden in silence for 3 decades. Meanwhile, perception of the old administrative guard plummeted. The text explicitly portrayed the palace bureaucracy as a cold, controlling machine that prioritized institutional image over basic human compassion. And the timing created an immediate operational problem. The palace had been scheduled to launch a major media campaign promoting Queen Camilla's upcoming state charity appearances in London. After the letter went viral, the media directors realized that proceeding with fashion and lifestyle content would look incredibly tone-deaf while the public was reading about a mother's final desperate warning. The king's chief secretary froze the entire promotional schedule and locked the media assets back in the archive vault. Then came the phone call that really shows where the power dynamic has shifted. The king's advisors wanted Prince William to sign a joint family statement that would acknowledge the letter's historical value while framing it as a reflection of a bygone era of court tension. William rejected the script completely during a 20-minute call. He told his father's private secretary that he wouldn't authorize his staff to participate in any campaign designed to minimize or spin his mother's original words. He said the letter was an authentic piece of his family history, and he fully respected the absolute confidentiality that his Aunt Anne had maintained for 30 years to protect his childhood. By refusing to back the defensive strategy, William effectively isolated the king's advisors and left the central palace apparatus exposed to the full force of public scrutiny. The press office phones rang continuously, with hundreds of international journalists demanding answers. But the press secretaries had nothing to say beyond a generic statement about the private nature of historical family papers. Their voices were reportedly cracking under the pressure. The postscript at the bottom of Diana's letter adds a haunting final layer to this entire story. She wrote that she was leaving for the Mediterranean the following morning with a deep sense of administrative anxiety, feeling that her time to secure her son's emotional safety was rapidly running out. That line, written just 3 weeks before her death, transforms this document from a piece of family correspondence into something much heavier. It's a time-stamped record of a mother who knew the institutional forces arrayed against her and chose to document them in writing, trusting that the document would eventually surface. And it did surface. Not through a leak or a tabloid payoff, but through her brother putting on white gloves in a library and unlocking a box with a key that had been waiting for this exact moment. The original manuscript was placed in a temperature-controlled archival box and permanently registered in the National History Logs at the London High Court Probate Registry. That legal act means Diana's words are now part of the public record, beyond the reach of palace censorship or modification. So what does all of this mean? For 30 years, we've been fed a story about rivalry, about jealousy, about two women who couldn't get along. But the truth was the exact opposite. Diana and Anne weren't enemies. They were allies fighting against a system that wanted to control them both. Diana needed someone inside the institution who couldn't be bullied or sidelined. Anne was that person. She had spent her entire career refusing to let the press dictate her public image, rejecting consultants, and running her office with fierce independence that frequently annoyed the central hierarchy. When Diana's marriage dissolved and her aristocratic friends withdrew their invitations to avoid offending the future king, Anne was the only senior Windsor who refused to participate in the isolation campaign. She didn't make speeches about it. She didn't leak to the press. She just kept showing up, kept providing information, kept her promise for 30 years. years. And now, thanks to a mahogany box in a Nortage, Hamptonshire Library, the truth is finally out. The woman the world thought was Diana's rival was actually her most trusted protector, and that changes everything. If this story opened your eyes to how much we've been misled about the royal family, don't keep it to yourself. Hit that like button and subscribe to this channel right now, because we're committed to uncovering the stories the palace doesn't want you to know. Drop a comment below and tell me, do you think there are even more secrets hidden in those archives? And what do you think will happen if that collection of 200 letters ever gets released? And don't go anywhere. Click the next video on your screen to discover another shocking revelation that the royal family tried to bury for decades. Trust me, you won't believe what we uncovered.